Welcome to the Founders Series, which is brought to you by 3i Members and the Rosen Report. I'm really excited to be with Craig Weiss today. Welcome, Craig. How you doing?
Good, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to the conversation and learning all about you and all the great businesses you're doing and some of the interesting things you're doing on the philanthropic side as well. So why don't we start with a little bit about your background, where you grew up, your childhood?
Sure. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. My parents moved here when I was 6 months old, so I'm an almost native. And I had a very unusual childhood in that my parents were married for 50 years, and my mom gave birth to children in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so
Wow.
I was the first five kids were born in 5 years and 3 months, no twins. Then 8 years later, me. Then 8 years later, my little brother. So I was like an only child with six brothers and sisters. So it was a growing up. I always joke most people grow up in a home with two adults called their parents. I had seven. My two parents and my five much older siblings. So a little bit of seven of everything, seven opinions, seven perspectives. Seven personalities to navigate. So I think it created a little bit of a sort of multi-perspective view of reality that I experienced. And my mom was a federal judge for 25 years. I think she was the only female federal judge in the United States with seven biological children. And she was an immigration judge. So in high school, my big joke to my friends was, if you mouth off at the dinner table, you could be sent to your room. I could be deported.
I love that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well, you would have just walked right back in. Now, if you got deported, then you just walked right through with the millions of others. So wouldn't have been a big deal. And then your dad was a patent attorney, right?
Yeah. So my father was a patent attorney. He had been the youngest ever managing patent attorney at IBM. I was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, where he was headquartered at the time, where IBM was. And then he moved the family out in 1973, 50 years ago, to be general patent attorney for Motorola. And then eventually he launched his own intellectual property law firm, which for a couple of decades, I think, was the largest IP firm in Arizona. The four oldest sons, of which I was the youngest of that four, all ended up becoming IP attorneys, and we all ended up working for my dad. So I understood a lot of those other dynamics as well, of working with your family, working with your dad, working with your brothers. That had its own set of challenges, and there were some pros and cons to all of that. And in some ways, I always joke, you probably haven't met any 8-year-olds who said they wanted to be a patent attorney. It might have had something to do with my dad and brothers all being IP attorneys. So to be a patent attorney, you have to have a bachelor's of science degree. I was a philosophy major in college, so I had not one credit towards a bachelor's of science degree. So I had to go back to school after law school to take the equivalent of a bachelor's of science in biology and chemistry. I did that, passed the patent bar, and then for about a decade was a patent attorney, working in the family firm, in the family business, before I became an entrepreneur and later a VC.
So how did the time as a patent attorney in the family business shape your approach to investing? What did you learn during that period that made you a solid investor today?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is, obviously I had no idea when I was a patent attorney that in the future I was going to be something other than a patent attorney. So it wasn't that I went into being a patent attorney for some kind of training to be an investor, but it sort of turns out that it was excellent training, because as a patent attorney, basically every day for 10 years, some new person would walk into my office and essentially pitch me their idea. Hey, I got this idea for an invention, or I'm starting a company and I want to do this and I want to do that. And so as a result, I was continuously having to evaluate other people's ideas, and not just evaluate them, but understand them. And that carried its own set of challenges, because I didn't know who was walking into my office on any given day and what it was they were going to describe to me. It could have been a medical device. It could have been a new type of game. It could have been a mechanical tool for doing something. And I had to quickly get up to speed, understand what it was they were describing, what problem were they trying to solve, and was this thing that they had come up with, did it provide utility? Was it novel? Was it innovative? And who is this person? Are they normal? Are they going to be able to pay my legal bills? Like, so I had to quickly evaluate on lots of different levels, ideas, and that turned out to be great training. That patent attorney training turned out to be, I think, highly relevant for being an investor, because you're always evaluating people, you're evaluating their ideas, and whether you think they are capable of executing on those fronts.
That's great. That's great. When you and I spoke, you spoke very highly of your mentor, Elliot. Can you talk about how you meet and what did he teach you?
Yeah, so it was Ellie.
Elliot. Okay.
Yeah. No, so it's funny, when we're in the U.S., he'll often introduce himself as Eli, because he's just sort of sick of people mispronouncing his name, and he knows Eli's sort of a kind of standard American name. I did junior year of college abroad in Jerusalem, of all places, and I met my wife there. She was a fellow American on junior year of abroad like me, so I was 20, she was 21, and we ended up living off and on in Israel for about 4 years. And during one of those times that I was living there in the year 2000, I met this very unique individual, this guy Ellie, who had accomplished things that I had never even heard of another person accomplishing. He took 3 companies from founding to IPO in his 20s. I've never heard of anyone doing that. He built Israel's first unicorn, he's the only person who can say that. And then he became one of the 10 partners at Benchmark that did Twitter and eBay, and now has his own sort of successful $250 million venture capital fund in Israel. And so we became friends in the year 2000, and after I returned back to Arizona in 2002, he would frequently visit the U.S. and say, "Hey, Craig, I'm going to be in Denver. Come meet me," or "I'm going to be in Salt Lake," or "I'm going to be, in Vegas." And he would also visit me occasionally in Arizona. And during those trips, we got to talk more and more about business. And in 2008. My father passed away, and it was really a turning point in my life, and fundamentally altered the trajectory of the rest of my life, because he had been the rainmaker of our law firm. He was a beloved guy. He was a mentor, and it wasn't clear the firm was going to make it without him. And so it was a great time of fear and uncertainty for me. I had a 15-month-old son who had just been diagnosed with some developmental delays, and so it was just a very scary time for me. And my dad was one of those guys who's always there for you, and then one day he wasn't. So started reading every business book I could get my hands on, joining CEO organizations. At the time, though, focused on the law firm as the business. And Ellie, at this point, kind of after my dad died, sort of transitioned from friend to mentor. And he was the first person to encourage me essentially to leave behind the practice of law and become an entrepreneur. And that happened over a series of conversations. And one of those conversations was he had heard that one of my middle brothers had founded a company as a venture of our law firms, this company called NJOY, in the electronic nicotine delivery space. And one day Ellie's like, "Hey, this electronic cigarette thing seems to be a big deal. It's a growing industry. It's getting pretty mainstream. Your family founded one of these companies. Craig, how come you're not more involved in this?" And that's sort of planted that first seed. And eventually, with his encouragement, I left behind the practice of law and became the president and then CEO of NJOY. And that's really, when I think back on my life, if you had asked me during that decade as a patent attorney, "Craig, are you happy? Are you passionate? Do you love what you do?" I probably would have given one of those, yeah, like one of those high-pitched answers that,
very high conviction level there.
Yeah, where you're like, that tone was so high that I just can't believe what you just said is possibly true. So, but I honestly didn't know what it felt like to feel that level of like passion and excitement professionally until I had it.
Well, I think what you just said is very important. I want to talk about it for a second. So I give a lot of motivational speeches and talk about career progression and what happens. And I think being passionate about what you do and loving what you do is really important. When I got my first job out of college, it was I was at a bank, and I got placed in a really bad group, and I didn't enjoy what I was doing. I wasn't treated as a partner. I wasn't treated with the respect that I felt like I should have been treated with. And I hated going to work every day. And through a bunch of circuitous events, I ended up getting into the trading desk. And ever since that day in 1994, my life changed because I love what I do. I love the people I work with. I was learning, I was growing, I was intellectually stimulated, I was treated like a partner. And all of a sudden I wasn't working. I was having fun every day. And the days, instead of being 15-hour days, they were like, oh my God, I'm already gone. Like, how did that happen? And I think, so, the inflection in your voice when somebody asked you about your passion about being an attorney, it was clear that you didn't have the passion, and then you got to do something that you were passionate about. And then all of a sudden, not only are you growing and developing and learning, but you're doing it really well because you love doing it. And so I think it's a very important message to the younger generation today. Doing something for money doesn't guarantee that you're going to like it and be successful. Doing something that you love doing in many cases turns out to be something you're passionate about that turns into a career and something that you're proud and enjoy doing. So I think that's a great message. So from there, after NJOY, you founded Flagstaff Ventures, focusing on early stage consumer. Can you talk about that? Because your returns have been amazing, and maybe touch on your
Sure.
returns and what your big home run was.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to talk about Flagstaff Ventures, I just have to go back a tiny bit to sort of talk about my experience as an operator and as a CEO, only because for a couple of reasons. One is, and just to piggyback on what you just said, when I guest lecture at W.P. Carey, the business school at Arizona State University, for the last 7 years, I actually think it's the largest business school in the world now. I think there's 15,000 students. So I do MBA, exec MBA, and seniors taking entrepreneurship. And I touch on what you just said, Eric, which is if you're not passionate about what you're doing, keep looking. In other words, don't accept that state that I had been in for 10 years, where if somebody asked me, I'd be like, well, I'm at, nah, it's okay, I guess, like that's not good enough. Like keep looking. And because to your point, I believe in that famous, I think it's Confucius who said, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
That's right.
It's really true. But yeah, so NJOY, first I'll say, my first day as an entrepreneur, we had 8 employees. We were in litigation with the FDA, and the controller said that we'd be out of cash in 2 weeks. So that was my welcome to being an entrepreneur moment. I know a lot of the people listening have had those similar moments themselves, where you're like, okay, I guess this is a lot messier than I thought it was going to be.
So can you tell me your frame of mind? So you get in 2 weeks into the job, you have 8 employees, and you might be out of cash, according to the controller. Tell the viewers what's going through your mind at that point, because it must have been just incredibly unnerving and concerning. So what were you thinking?
Well, so first of all, after my dad died, it was basically, so let me go back. I would say there's a tremendous book called The Middle Passage, written by this guy named Jim Hollis. And it's essentially about navigating midlife, which probably everyone who's listening to this is somewhere in that middle passage, navigating our middle life. And one of the things that he says is that every human being essentially has 2 deaths: your physical death at the end of your life, but then there's the death of your innocence, or the death of your childhood when you become an adult. And for some people, that can happen when they're 5 and they see their dad beating their mom. But for me, it was 34. It was when my dad died. That's actually when I became an adult. And up until that point, I wasn't really an adult because I wasn't really in any danger of losing my job. My dad was my boss, right? So I didn't have that kind of fear that most people have. And after he died, it was like the stakes got very real and very high. And so it felt to me like I was on that tightrope, and they just pulled the safety net. And, it was like, oh, okay, like now we're playing for keeps. So there was a lot of fear, no question about it. But it wasn't like going back to the law firm was some safe bet. Everything seemed pretty dangerous and risky at that point in my life. So for me, I had this kind of like failure is not an option attitude about my life at that point. Like I'm just gonna have to figure it out. And so I leaned heavily on Ellie. I called him every day for like the first 2 years, because I can't sort of overstate how unqualified I was to be the CEO of this company. This was manufacturing, R&D, distribution, regulatory, marketing, branding, all these things that I had no experience in whatsoever. And so I called every day, like, what should I do about this? What should I do about that? So there was fear, there was plenty of fear, but it was also this, like, there was something liberating about this feeling of, well, me and my team are going to have to figure this stuff out. Like, no one's going to save you.
So what happened specifically that you're going to be out of money in a couple of weeks? You're living with fear. You're speaking with Ellie every day. What was the turning point that went from, oh my God, we're going to close and run out of money and file bankruptcy, to the ultimate huge success that it became? What was the turning point?
So basically, well, the first thing I had to do was, we owed money to all of these vendors and we couldn't pay them. So my first task as CEO was very uncomfortable phone calls where I would basically do a call that would sound something like this. Hi, Eric. My name's Craig Weiss. I'm the new CEO at NJOY. I know we owe you X amount of dollars and we're overdue in paying you. I know you don't know me and you have no reason to trust me. I promise I will pay you. I just can't pay you today. But as soon as we get paid from our customers, I will pay you. I promise I won't screw you over. And so our vendors became sort of unwillingly our line of credit to sort of solve these cash flow challenges that we had to. It was a long time for us to get paid from our customers, and then I had to get paid before I could pay my vendors. And then I had to start raising money, which it wasn't something I had had a lot of experience doing. But the real turning point was, there were several actually. One was we defeated the FDA in federal court. So we got an injunction against the FDA, which I love saying because I don't know anyone else who can say that they defeated the FDA in federal court. It really created the legal framework for the entire industry. And so that was obviously a huge turning point.
They were so what was, just give me a 2-second background on what the case, what exactly were they, what was the suit about?
Yeah, so basically the FDA had directed U.S. Customs to seize shipments of NJOY's product at the border as an unapproved drug delivery device. And so we sued the FDA, essentially saying that they had overstepped their jurisdiction to try to regulate us as a medical device when we were not making any therapeutic claims. And their argument was, yeah, but nicotine has an effect on the human body. And our response was, so does sugar, so does caffeine. Those are also addictive and also affect the human body in lots of different ways. You're not regulating those products because they don't make therapeutic claims, neither do we. And so it got more complicated than that, and we made other arguments, but that was sort of the crux of it. And then we, in physical products, you have, if there's as opposed to like Uber, which is a consumer-facing tech product, but if you've got a consumer packaged good, a physical product, then you essentially, unless you're just selling on Amazon, if you're going to sell at retail, you have to go through a distributor. And these, the example I always give is the average convenience store in the United States has 2,000 SKUs. Well, they can't have 2,000 trucks pull up, right? They need one truck to pull up with 2,000 products, and that's the distributor. And so if you want to get into 7-Eleven or Walmart or Walgreens, you need to have a relationship with a distributor. And so the next big domino to fall was we landed McLane, which at the time was a $34 billion Berkshire Hathaway distributor, the largest in the country. And they were the main distributor for Walmart and Walgreens and 7-Eleven and Circle K. And we were the first electronic cigarette product to be accepted by McLane. And that really opened a lot of doors, actually, quite literally.
So what was the final, you ended up selling it? Can you, what did it sell? What did it sell for? So you were near bankrupt in 2008, 9, and then you sold it when, for how much?
So the 60-second version ended up raising $200 million in private equity. Peter Thiel, Sean Parker, Founders Fund, Catterton, Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, Bain, got to $1 billion valuation in 3.5 years. Manufactured 80 million units of a relatively complicated regulated hardware product, distributed in 130,000 retail locations. So all 50 states, most of Europe. We had commercials that ran in the Super Bowl in a bunch of markets, billboards in Times Square, double-decker buses in London. And the company got acquired last year for $2.75 billion by Altria. I exited in 2015. So I was there for about half a decade, 2010 to 2015.
Amazing. Well, congratulations. I love hearing those success stories and turning lemons into lemonade. So fantastic. So as a follow-up to that, you made 11 investments and about half were in female founders. Was that done intentionally? And what have you learned with based on those investments?
Yeah, so I had this, I mentioned this interesting childhood. Well, the first two kids out of the seven were my sisters. And so they were the two oldest. So I had this mom who was this respected federal judge. And then my sister Gail, had a PhD from Yale and was a serious professor and published author. And my sister Felicia had a PhD in clinical psychology. So
why is everybody in the family such an underachiever? What happened?
I haven't gotten to my older brothers, which was two professional athletes.
Can I get some DNA shots from my kids, please? I mean, come on. I've clearly hurt my children because I wasn't part of your family. My goodness.
Yeah. So, well, I could say this. Imagine growing up where your older siblings or those two sisters. Then two of my brothers were professional tennis players that achieved world rankings before they became IP attorneys. And then the oldest brother was sort of top of his class in law school, got a master's in international law from Georgetown, where he was number one, and then got a master's in biotechnology from Johns Hopkins. So wow. I had people that I knew I was never going to outsmart or outwork or out athlete ahead of me in the pecking order. So, but yeah, what was sort of fascinating for me was I grew up as a feminist without really knowing what that word meant, because the only women that I was really close with were rock stars. So I just kind of assumed that, they were the women in my family were as accomplished or more accomplished than the men in my family. So that was just kind of my worldview. And in 2022, I think women took down around 2% of institutional capital, but outperformed their male counterparts on a dollar for dollar basis. And so, it's, obviously an underfunded group. I wouldn't say that I went out like looking to invest in women. It's just I saw spectacular women who weren't getting funded by anybody else, and I couldn't understand why not. And so I'm proud of the fact that half the companies we invested in Fund One were female founder CEOs. Also, half were pre-revenue when we invested. So when we say early stage, because of my experience at NJOY, I was used to the chaos, right, of just coming in and everything's a disaster and you're going to run out of money and everything's a mess. So that chaos and that early stage doesn't scare me, and I'm familiar with it. So we're comfortable in early stage, which is where you get this tremendous asymmetry. Like as a VC, I hunt asymmetry. So I'm looking for massive upside, and the downside is always fixed, capped, and knowable. It's the size of your investment. So if I invest whatever it is, 500 grand, $1 million, I know what the downside is. It's the 500 grand or the $1 million going to zero. But that upside is uncapped and potentially much, much, much larger. And so whenever I see those opportunities where I think there's a reasonable chance that some founder could achieve greatness, and I see that greatness could be a very big number, and then the downside is relatively small compared to the upside. Those are great opportunities, and so that's what I've been seeking. So yeah, we did 11 investments in Fund One. Our big sort of home run was I knew when I launched Flagstaff Ventures that my claim to fame as a first time VC was my NJOY story. Hey, I built a unicorn with my own two hands. But I knew that sophisticated institutional investors would say, fine, you know how to build them. Do you know how to find them? Different skill set. You're a VC now. So I was fortunate. I found this company that was consumer legal. So essentially it was an app for hiring a lawyer. And the premise I thought was quite compelling to me, which is most Americans don't have a lawyer, but if you get pulled over for a DUI or serve divorce papers, you need a lawyer. So what's your process for getting that lawyer? You either have to tell your friends and family some embarrassing or private thing that happened to you, or go on the internet or remember the jingle or look at the billboard. And so when you finally get in front of that lawyer, you basically have two questions. How much is this going to cost? What's going to happen? And the lawyer says, well, I charge $7.50 an hour. Well, how many hours? It depends. What's going to happen? It depends. So they have their own lawyers. Then they have algorithms for outcome prediction and cost prediction to kind of solve all of these pain points. And I was able to invest $100,000 personally. This is before my fund launched, a few months before my fund launched, and at a $21 million valuation. It was an oversubscribed round, but they liked that I was a recovering attorney.
Was it the A? It wasn't a seed round. It was the A.
It was actually a seed round.
Okay.
So I haven't invested. It's funny. We haven't done a Series A. We've only done pre-seed and seed so far in all of our investments. And it's not that I wouldn't do a Series A, but that would be late stage for us, and we're very early stage. But so yeah, I invested 100 grand on a $21 million pre-money valuation. They liked that I was, a recovering attorney who'd built a unicorn in the consumer space, and so I moved that into the fund as my GP contribution. And then 4 months later, they became a unicorn. They raised 80 at 920 pre. I sold a third of my position for 760 in the secondary market. I was able to do a year one distribution, back to my LPs, which is very rare, almost unheard of in venture, certainly in early stage venture. And then, I had a second markup in Fund One that was very exciting. So that company's called Flare, and it's over $1 billion valuation now, and is raised a ton of money and is doing very well. And then the second markup we had in Fund One was a company called Dorsia. We were the first institutional investor in the company. 1.2 million.
I'm part of it. I know it. I'm part of it. It's great.
It's
a brilliant idea. So why don't you just quickly tell us what exactly Dorsia is?
Sure.
And then we'll move on to the next one.
Yeah. So, I got pitched this really brilliant idea, which was essentially that the top restaurants in the world, like the types of restaurants that you and I couldn't get into, even if we were billionaires, Michelin star, type restaurants, they basically said, look, we went to these restaurants and said, you don't think you have a revenue problem because you're sold out every night, but actually you do, because you didn't realize that, Eric and Craig just wanted to say we were going to eat at Carbone and we're going to order salad and, split a salad, order water, and you guys are going to take a bath on that table. What the average four top generates for you at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, whatever it is, $500, we'll give you $1,000. In exchange, you give us the inventory and we'll charge a 7.5% commission on the first 3 tables, 5% commission thereafter. And then the best part is you land at JFK, you pull up this app and you're like, oh my gosh, Carbone tonight, 4 people. Oh, I've got, clients, or I'm going out on a date. And so you press the button, well, your credit card zinged whatever that amount is. But when you show up at the restaurant, it's not a Ticketmaster service fee. You have $1,000 credit. Well, you're not going to do that all in food. You'll get some expensive bottle of wine, but that's a 90% gross margin product for the restaurant. Everybody wins, everybody gets value. So I'm like, wow, I think that's a great idea. I'm not worried about the demand. I'm worried about the supply. Like, how are you really going to get these restaurants to sign up? And they're like, that's the best part. We have exclusives and they're investors. They're actually on our cap table. And so I was like, oh, okay, now I'm interested. So
how's it doing? Is the company killing it?
Yeah, they're open now in New York, Miami, LA, San Francisco, London. They continue to expand city by city because they want to get that critical mass within a city of the top restaurants and then manage the sort of equilibrium of the supply and the demand. Well, Index Ventures, Tier 1 VC, Slack, Dropbox, Etsy invested $12 million on a 44 pre last year. So that was our second markup in Fund 1. I think it's going to be one of the sexiest companies in America by the end of this year for a lot of reasons, but I think the world's moving away from acquiring material possessions and towards experiences as the most sort of highly correlated to personal happiness. And so this gives you the ability to have heightened quality experiences, like a wonderful meal, whether it's an anniversary or a business.
Listen, I've used it. I think it's a great idea. So hats off to them for thinking about it. Okay, so I do want to talk about a phrase that you've said, and I've thought a lot about it since we spoke, and that's a karmapreneur. And I just love the phrase. I'd like you to talk with us about what exactly that means and what are the implications.
So when I launched Flagstaff Ventures to do early stage consumer, one of my motivations was, as a former founder and operator myself, I often felt like institutional investors tell founders a lie. And the lie is we're more than just capital. We're value add. We're strategic. And I think a lot of founders out there would agree with me that that's usually bullshit. It's, if anything, that a lot of institutional investors detract from your ability to get your job done, but for their capital. And I was determined to make true the lie, to actually add value beyond capital. And what ended up happening was, over and over and over again, I would just go into every meeting I had with a founder with this attitude of, I want to provide value. And at the end of this call, I want them to leave with some benefit that they did not have before the call. And end up giving these sort of speeches like, hey, listen, if I had a crystal ball, Eric, and I knew I wasn't going to make $1 from this relationship, I still want you to win. I want you to be successful. I'd like to be helpful. If you want me to review a pitch deck, if you want an intro, if you want to bounce some idea off of me, I'm happy to help. And I started to notice this thing called profit started to show up when I stopped focusing on that and just tried to focus on providing value. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, you got to talk to this guy, Craig, or you got to talk to these Flagstaff Ventures guys. They're doing it differently. And founders would start saying things to me like, oh my God, you're like the first person who actually understands my business. Or you're the first person to ask me the right questions. Or, because part of what got me going on Flagstaff Ventures was I had founded a couple of companies after NJOY, and one of those got venture backed in 2020. And I went out to raise more money for that company in 21. A friend of mine introduced me to 10 VCs, and I was like, God, I forgot how much I hated VCs. Like all the cliches were true. It was 10 young, dumb white guys who'd never run a business in their life and thought the world runs like an Excel spreadsheet. And I was complaining to a friend of mine, like, God, these guys are all idiots. And he was like, well, if you think they're all idiots, why don't you do it yourself? And so with Karmapreneur, I realized over time that essentially, if I had to define the term, there's a lot of ways I could define it. But one of them is doing good is good business. Like, I think there's two types of for-profit businesses in the world. Those that are just trying to figure out how to get the money out of your pocket into my pocket as fast as possible, or the ones that are actually just trying to provide value and be appropriately compensated for providing value. And I'm only interested in the latter, not the former. So when I meet people, you brought up earlier, when I meet people and I say, so why are you doing what you're doing? Sometimes they'll say, I just want to make a lot of money. I don't invest in those people. I don't think it's not because they can't be successful. I know people who make a lot of money, maniacally focused on making a lot of money, but they're not my kind of people. And I don't think that on the whole, those statistically lead to the best outcomes. But I think people who are obsessed with providing value and just delivering the best possible either product or user experience, those people tend to win. And so for me, we all have those moments where you have to make decisions that there's some gray area of, I could do it one of two ways. I could kind of sort of do it the right way, or I could cut corners. And for me, the people who are the karmapreneurs believe in karma. And I heard a wonderful definition of karma the other day. They said the best definition is cause and effect. Whatever you put out in the world, you get back. So the people who are focused on doing good, being honest, being truthful, not trying to screw their customers, but try to benefit their customers, I feel like that comes back. And I've experienced it myself. Our first, we had our audit for the first 18 months of Fund One. It threw off a 35% net IRR. And we, as we launched in the worst possible market, into COVID, and so I've experienced it myself, which is if you just keep doing the right thing, good things tend to happen.
Well, listen, I love that, and that's a positive vibe that we need in a world with a lot of very negative headlines, and it's good to do good. And I love hearing that. And I mentor 70 kids a year, and I try to give back to the community because I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, and good things happened for me. And I retired young, and now a big part of my day is spent educating college kids and young professionals about what is in the art of possible. I don't charge anybody for it. I just do it. And all these good things are coming out of that. And I started something called Rosen Report Jobs, where the main focus is to get kids internships. I built it, paid for it myself, and I'm not charging the company or the kid. I just want to get kids jobs because it feels like a good thing to do. And I agree with you, and I commend you on what you're doing, and that's great. So why don't we end it with, you're a member of 3i. Talk about what your highlight is as part of your membership.
So one of the things that I love about communities like 3i is I'm passionate, as you are, about business and about sort of deals. And I'm passionate for a specific reason, which is we live in a world right now with, I think, a very healthy and well-earned distrust for the government. Um, and again, I'm not saying that from the perspective of one party or another. I personally don't really trust either party, at all. And so for me, I feel like when I look at the most complicated problems that the world is facing, the solutions I believe are going to come from companies, from the private sector, not from the public sector. And we see that over and over again. If you ask people right now who they perceive benefits them more, the government or Amazon, the government or Apple, right? Like, I think they're going to say, some of these private companies do a lot more for them than they feel that is being done for them by the public. And so, I experienced this personally at NJOY. When I joined NJOY, the smoking rate in the United States was increasing, not decreasing. In 08 and 09, it was going up. And when I started at NJOY, 21.2% of adult Americans were smokers. And if you'd asked public health and the FDA and the federal government how long it would take to get that number below 15%, they would have said decades, based on where it was going. And when I left, in just 3.5 years, we'd gotten it to under 14%. Today, it's 11%. We basically cut it in half in a relatively short period of time. And so you're talking about tens of millions of Americans who are not smokers anymore. And, the World Health Organization said a billion humans were going to die this century from smoking. And nicotine's not carcinogenic. It's an FDA-approved drug. It was the delivery system that was toxic and that was killing people. And I was able to recruit the 17th Surgeon General of the United States onto my board of directors at NJOY because I was like, we're going to save more lives than you were able to save in the federal government, because the private sector has come up with this thing. We're using this thing called technology, right, to solve a really serious problem that was also had an economic benefit. You had about $1 trillion was being spent every year on tobacco products. And these people didn't want to get cancer and die. They just wanted the nicotine. And so I've had that experience. I believe in the private sector. I believe in the power of entrepreneurs and small businesses to change the world. I think we've all experienced that. And I feel like that's the engine of our economy, and the fuel that goes in that engine is the capital. And what I've really noticed is early stage is where it's at, because these entrepreneurs, these young founders, they have an amazing idea. They might have some early traction, but what they need is capital, and they need growth capital, and they can't really get it because they're not going to get it from a bank, and they're not going to get it from private equity. And ventures kind of moved upstream over the last 15 years. It's pretty late stage now. So the real void in the marketplace was early stage. And what I found, and I know, 3i is a deal network. If you ask almost any VC in the country, what's your number one choke point? They'd say, I wish I had more quality deal flow. I have the exact opposite problem. I have unlimited quality deal flow. I see an amazing company basically every day. And so, because no one's doing early stage consumer. So they're just like, oh, it's consumer. You should talk to this guy, Craig, in Arizona. So I've got all this unbelievable inbound deal flow of fascinating early stage consumer companies. And they've amazing founders, amazing companies. They just need capital.
Well, thank you. That's great. I mean, a lot is being made out of Davos. I mean, I think Davos has become a little bit of a joke in light of these elites telling everybody what they should do as they fly in on their G650s and tell you that, you shouldn't drive your car. And there was this great speech by the new president of Argentina. It was 20 minutes long, and I strongly suggest everyone listening take a listen. It's going to be in an upcoming Rosen report. I'm writing about it. And it's talking about how capitalism is great and how it drives growth and invention. And I'm 100% in agreement with it. And I really found his speech fascinating. So, Craig, I had a great time with you today. I learned a lot. I love the Karmapreneur tagline. It's fantastic. And I really appreciate you joining us today and telling us your story. And I look forward to meeting in person and getting to know you even better over time. So I look forward to it. I think there's going to be an event in Arizona in October, and I'll be there. And so hopefully we will see you there. And I end every podcast with me and my Rosen Report hat, a little swag. So I always put that on at the end. So thanks for joining. I had a great time with you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I commend you also for the mentorship you're doing for these kids. They're the next generation. It's amazing. And I hope to be able to host you and anyone else from 3i in October.
Great. See you then.
Thanks so much.